And here we go. I already asked a couple people, how is everyone? How is everyone doing? How is your weekend? How's the research coming along?
I'm doing good.
Right on.
Research could be better, but I had a good weekend.
Yeah, same. Like I actually finally got out of the house for an extended period of time. Took the dogs for a long walk around the neighborhood.
100%.
A lot more people are walking lately. That's what I've noticed around my neighborhood.
Walking and running. Apparently, everyone's preparing for a marathon now. I haven't seen my neighbors in a while, which is not a bad thing. I just find it interesting. I've been cooking like crazy. I've already got an Easter dinner planned, even though no one that I know is coming over for Easter. But on the off chance that anyone does, I've got a full Easter meal planned. Whatever that means. Cool. All right. So I don't think today is going to be a super long class either, but I want to make sure we talk about a couple of important things. The two biggest ones being organizing a longer paper like this, because while I've imagined you've written a longer research paper before, probably like 7 to 10 pages, maybe like senior year of high school or so. College research papers are a little bit different in terms of how they're structured. I talked a little bit about this last week. We're going to kind of touch on it again today. And then also how to use your sources. Because a lot of you, based on what I saw, have found some really awesome sources. And I plan to leave comments on those sources later on today. I'll just kind of type into the comment box on Canvas saying, hey, this source is really good, check it out. Or hey, this source doesn't look as good, but you still might be able to use it in this way. Just so that way you have some kind of feedback about the stuff that you're looking at. But there's a difference between the sources that you use to kind of provide background information and context and the sources you use that actually kind of contribute to your argument that you're building off of. So we'll talk about both those things today. I don't think it'll take more than 20, 30 minutes or so. I will be holding office hours today. What I'm going to try to do this time is I'm going to start a Zoom meeting like this with the same meeting ID, and you can just pop in and out whenever you want. If I'm with a student and that student is okay with you also joining the conversation, I can do that. If you want to do one-on-one, that's also fine. But I wanted to make sure that everyone had that opportunity if you need to talk to me. Because I get the feeling that sometimes people kind of get nervous and they don't want to intrude, or it's just kind of like a different kind of awkward format. But you should have contact with me in a way other than email. It's a lot easier to conversate face-to-face, so to speak, than typing back and forth all night long. So just as a reminder, let me share my screen. So just as a reminder, scroll through these, about the structure of a research paper. So 5 major parts: introduction, background/literature review, support, counter-argument, conclusion. As I said before, you're probably already familiar with the introduction and conclusion. What I want to talk about today is the background/literature review. Because this is the section of the paper. It's no more than usually about a paragraph or so, especially for a relatively shorter research paper like this one. But it provides any necessary background information that you maybe couldn't touch on in your introduction. So like in your introduction, you'll set up the basic context for your argument. But then if you need to go deeper into any kind of background information that the reader needs to know about, you'll do that in that following paragraph. Or if you're studying something that's been researched a lot before and you're kind of looking at it in a new way, that literature review is basically a summary of the research that's been done up to that point. So you might see especially in science papers or psychology papers, they might say something along the lines of, in the 60s, Dr. So-and-so found that cognitive development, blah, blah, blah. Then in the 90s, this happened, and today I'm studying this thing. That's a literature review more properly, explaining what's been done up to this point, what still holds up, what doesn't hold up, whereas background is just kind of historical or cultural background information that everyone needs to understand to read the paper. So for example, I know Bella's writing about graffiti and how different protesters in Hong Kong during the Hong Kong protests last year were using graffiti as methods of communication. Something she might want to do for her background is explain why there's such a tense relationship between the people of Hong Kong and the mainland Chinese government. That's not something I would expect an average reader to know, but it's something that's important to know if you're going to understand the full kind of scope of the argument she's going to bring forward. Same thing if you're talking about, like I know people are talking about gender and alcohol, same thing there. If you want to talk about how depictions of gender have changed over the last several years, even if just not the last like decade or so, and how even though it looks like things have changed, maybe things are still not as great as they could be, or things are still kind of sexist or misogynistic or violent just in a more subtle way. That's the kind of place where we can kind of introduce that background information there. Has anyone done kind of a literature review or background portion of a paper before? A resounding no? That's okay. So what I want to do is I want to show you kind of like a literature review that I have done before for an article that I wrote. Can everyone see this, the Word document?
No.
No, you can't? Okay, then give me a second. I will.
Okay.
What's up?
I was just agreeing with everybody saying they don't see it.
Okay, cool. Then I'm going to do this. How about this? Good?
Good.
Cool,
Yeah.
sweet. So this is a literature review kind of, this is more of a literature review than a background section, but I think it still holds up, that I wrote for an article that I was writing about for Herman Melville, the guy who wrote Moby Dick. He wrote another novel called Pierre, very kind of weird, takes place in New York in the 1850s, but there's lots of references to erotic publications, which is a fancy way of saying pornography. And I wrote a paper about it because no one else was writing about it. Anyway, this is kind of like my literature review section here. So Melville scholars have previously examined how Pierre responds to and appropriates other elements of the popular fiction of its contemporary moment. Such and such scholar reads Pierre as, quote, a satire of the popular fiction that was commercially successful in Melville's day, though it is not always clear what genres and print materials fall under the category of popular fiction. When Kelly's Pierre's Domestic Ambiguities and Cindy Weinstein's We Are Family are more specific about their focus, both critics finding the influence of domestic literature in sentimental novels and Pierre's female characterizations and its protagonist's personal journey. However, these critical discussions have largely remained situated within a respectable canon that scholars see as having redeeming literary qualities. So what I'm doing here is I'm introducing who else has studied this text or this issue before, and what they do that's good, that's helpful to me, and what they do that I notice is kind of not they're doing anything wrong, but that they're leaving out. So like when I talk about Wynne Kelly and Cindy Weinstein, they're talking about other popular domestic novels, but they're not talking about the more kind of like newspapers and magazines that would have also influenced the writer during this time. The kind of like lower tier literature that most people don't pay attention to. Same thing here later on, I say all the sources previously mentioned refer to such and such novel, and they individually cite texts such as such and such and such and such. Popular novels such as these could have been found in almost any respectable home in America, and they remain widely studied by scholars of early American literature. While examinations of these novels remain important, they also risk creating a kind of cultural elitism, privileging some works over others simply because the others might have been read by less educated or less cultured populations. So that's basically my argument here, saying like, well, we know what the popular stuff was at the time. We know what the high literature was. Let's look at the stuff that was also popular, but that we don't study as much because we don't think it's as important. It'd be the equivalent today of being like, hey, we're reading all these like novels that were popular in the 2010s or 2020s, but maybe we should look at Twitter and see what was going on over there and see like how people were interacting there. Would be kind of the equivalent there. So I use this literature review section to explain who I'm building off of, what other arguments are out there that I found helpful, that I'm going to be in conversation with throughout my paper. And I guess provide a quick little summary. I don't kind of go into their whole argument. And then I'll draw from these people later on in my main body paragraphs when I'm either building off of something that they already wrote or I'm contradicting them in some way. And that's the difference between using sources as background information and sources as evidence. For the background, you're just kind of giving the bare facts, explaining the bare summary of what it is that you're bringing up. But for supporting evidence, you're actively putting yourself in conversation with some part of that argument. So for example, this article, Wynne Kelly's Pierre Domestic Ambiguities, I'm not going to interact with her entire article because most of her article does not have to do with anything that I'll be talking about in my paper. But she does bring up certain issues that I also need to address in my paper. And maybe I agree with her, maybe I don't agree with her, but I still need to acknowledge that I'm not the first person to think about these issues. There are other people out there that have done this too, but I am offering a different way of thinking about them. Now, as first years writing research papers, you're probably not doing super original research, but you should still acknowledge what kind of newer position you're taking. You shouldn't be building your research off of sources from 30, 40 years ago. Your research should be very current. So even if you're kind of almost repeating in some ways what other people have been saying around the same time, you're still kind of putting your own spin on these issues, these arguments. Does anyone have any questions about the background section or the literature review section? My guess is that for most of you, this paragraph will largely be historical or cultural and not so much scholarly, but I don't know. Maybe for some of you, you will choose to go more this route. I think the next question I also kind of, in this paragraph, because this was a 20-something page paper, I also kind of used an extra paragraph to kind of go into more background information, more literature review. And this paragraph here actually is more in line with a background paragraph, like a historical information paragraph that the reader needs to know to understand the rest of the argument. So here I explain, what flash weeklies were. They're the first erotic publications, kind of prominence in New York in the 1840s. And I explain what these papers are and why they're important and why I'm addressing them. And basically it's because lots of people read them, even if they didn't say they were reading them. So this is more in line with like a proper historical or cultural background information paragraph here. Same thing with, I think this one down here as well. Same thing with this kind of paragraph, where like I'm giving kind of statistics and explaining like how print culture exploded during this time and how certain magazines circulated and stuff like that. That's all background information that's kind of dry, kind of a little boring, but that the reader needs to understand before I can talk about why I'm comparing this super famous novel with these less famous magazines. Like saying, hey, I know you don't think this is important, but people who lived in the 1840s thought it was important, and here's why. Questions about that? Questions about how you think you might set up your literature review or background sections, or anyone concerned that they don't have any information to do this yet? Cool, right on. So now that I've given you an example of how you take a source and work it into a background paragraph or literature review paragraph, I also want to take a look at how you can incorporate evidence. You can incorporate your sources as actual evidence and not just as background information. So let me Let me minimize this, block my thing. So this was another article I wrote about, I may have shared this with my class last semester, about Pepsi commercials and just kind of commercials in general that try to engage viewers' emotions, and how it seems like that's a good thing. Like you want to be acknowledged as an emotional human being who has good moods and bad moods, etc. But ultimately the point of my argument was, well, really it's just a way to sell you things. They don't actually care about how you feel. So I talked about in my background section, in my history kind of section, my background paragraph, I talked about how in this day and age, we have a lot more customer satisfaction surveys, or you fill out reviews for different products and stuff on Amazon or wherever you buy things from. And all that's based in emotions. Because if you're not happy with the product that you receive, you're going to write a bad review. Whereas if you are happy, you're writing a good review, and that bodes well for the company. So that was my background section, but now I go much more specific in this paragraph here. And I'm talking specifically about the Pepsi commercial where Kendall Jenner appeared. Anyone remember that one?
Yeah.
Cool, 2 people, awesome. But yeah, so basically my point for this paragraph was like talking about how different companies try to raise awareness of certain issues. But my point was, well, awareness does not equal activism. And she takes, this is Ahmed, this other scholar, she takes it for granted that society at large will change for the better if we merely acknowledge the unhappiness of others. Such a positivist outlook is reminiscent of the Pepsi commercial in which Kendall Jenner joins a Black Lives Matter-esque protest before handing a can of Pepsi to a police officer standing by. Everyone cheers her on as though all this trouble might have been saved by a visit to the corner store. The controversial commercial presents Jenner as a practitioner of Ahmed's affect theory. She both acknowledges the discontent of the protesters by joining their cause, while also acknowledging the unhappiness of the police officers by offering them a conciliatory can of soda. The underlying message appears to be that if we simply understand each other's unhappy emotional states as being legitimate, the world will change for the better. Never mind the details. So this scholar Ahmed that I mentioned up here, that I'm kind of like directly contradicting with my example here. Dogs. My dogs are fighting. That I directly contradict here. I talk about her in my literature review section because she's a big proponent of, if we just pay attention to the way companies interact with our emotions and the way we pay attention to how we are unhappy or happy, we'll be a better society. My point here is like, well, that's not enough. If you just pay attention to emotions, it doesn't actually get to the heart of whatever people are upset about. Yeah, we see this. And if you've seen this commercial before, it's actually kind of weird because I say Black Lives Matter-esque, but you don't know what they're protesting because the signs just say things like peace, love, very generic kind of slogans. So it's not even really clear like what they're fighting for or against. And it's kind of this neutered political statement where the whole point is like, we should all just get along no matter how we might disagree or how we might differ in our opinions. But it doesn't actually explain what those differences might be. Are we arguing about, we have different political ideas about how the economy should work? Or are we saying like, white supremacy is a good idea? It doesn't go that far, obviously, but it doesn't quite get at the heart of why people might be disagreeing in the first place. All this is to say, the super complicated way of saying that when you're using your sources as examples, that's when you're diving more deeply into analyzing them and critically engaging with them. And you're not always going to disagree or contradict the way I am, but if you agree with your source in some way, figure out how you're building off of them. Don't just repeat what they're saying. But if someone who said, 20 years ago, alcohol companies have gotten better at depicting women in ads by showing them in more professional settings, you might say that's true, but these professional settings are often office spaces where there are still secretaries or they're still junior partners or not full-fledged CEOs or anything like that. So you can acknowledge like, hey, you're right, these things have improved, but these things could also be a lot better. Trying to see if I have something else where I interact with others as well. Mm-hmm. My dogs are very upset that I'm lecturing today. Okay, so I kind of engage with it here because I'm quoting from Ahmed. The social construction of happiness or other emotions leads to the creation of what Ahmed refers to as an effective community, a community where everyone presumably feels the same way about the same things. What is unclear in Ahmed's construction, though, is how an effective community actually functions. So that's, again, me bringing in her idea, talking about her, kind of summarizing what she's saying, and then directly engaging with it. Here, again, I don't totally contradict her, but I do say, hey, they don't explain how this thing works. And then maybe my solution would be, well, I'm going to explain how it works. Maybe my solution would be, it doesn't work at all, and I'm going to directly contradict her. The whole point of providing sources as evidence is to engage with them in some way or to support your argument in some way. You don't want to just kind of throw them into your paper for the sake of throwing them in there saying, I found these sources, they work now. You want to be having a conversation with these sources in some way. Buddy, what is going on down there? Calm down. So I realize that I'm showing you super sophisticated examples from higher level research papers, but the idea is the same no matter what. The idea is always going to be you're either building off of your sources or you're providing a brief summary of them so that your readers understand what's happening. They all function the same way, even if they are used in more sophisticated ways or less sophisticated ways. So one thing, I wish I could more easily scan your in-class essays because a number of them were quite good. And a number of you did really well at taking one of the quotes that I gave you, of the 4 quotes that I gave you, and then not just bringing it up, but also building off of it and engaging with that quote in some way. I thought that was really great. I'm sorry I can't show it to you, but that's the kind of stuff you should be doing. You don't want to just kind of throw a quote in there just for the sake of throwing it in there. You want to be having a conversation with it. And I know I'm repeating myself and saying it over and over again, but that's one of the most important parts of doing research is not just repeating others, but asserting your own opinion and your own ideas. So with that being said, no, that's not what I want. So that being said, what questions do you have for me? What concerns do you have? I'm sure you can hear my dogs playing in the background. Dogs. Hey. Come here. Come here. Yeah. Yeah. How's everyone doing with sources and finding sources? Today you had an optional assignment where you could have turned in a couple extra sources with annotations if you wanted to for me to look over. One person did that, others didn't. You didn't have to. It was just an optional assignment if you wanted to kind of get ahead of your research, ahead of your annotated bibliography that's due later on this week. But if you wanted to submit extra sources there for me to look over, I'd be happy to do so. We should talk about the annotated bibliography one more time, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, because the due date will start at noon on Wednesday, and it'll end at noon on Friday. And the reason I'm giving you that 48-hour window is because I understand that a lot of you have other classes and other projects to work on. It's a very kind of hectic time for everyone. If you can finish earlier, great. I'll take that into consideration when grading, but you won't be penalized if you turn it in on Thursday or Friday. I will absolutely understand. I will not take points off. If you turn it in like late Friday or Saturday, then I might need to consider like, hey, like what's going on? Do we need to have a conversation or something? So let's quickly go over those requirements one more time. Where is... So this is your Canvas page. I'm sure you've all looked at it recently. Yeah. Pretty sure this is it. Not quite. My computer is also absurdly slow this morning, which does not do well for...
Canvas is having problems. They sent us an email about it.
Oh, was it? Okay, I thought so. Because when I was trying to access some things earlier, I couldn't do it through my phone, but I could do it on here. Instructions.
Yeah, it's like feeling slow.
That's upsetting. Okay, so your instructions, again, create an annotated bibliography page. 9 sources is what I'm looking for. 2 of those can be images, and your annotation will just be explaining what the image is and how you think you might use that image. I'll allow up to 3 images, but you really need to make a strong case for why you would include that third one. So basically, you're at least finding 6 to 7 print sources. And when I say print, I mean online and like physically in print, whether that be peer-reviewed journals or online websites as opposed to offline websites, magazines, etc. And then 2 or 3 images. You're obviously not going to use all these sources in your final paper, and that's totally fine. But as I've said before, I would rather you have too many options than not have enough so that you're scrambling on the last day to find another source when you don't have one. For your final paper, you'll need to have at least 5 sources that you're working with. Obviously, again, more is better, but don't force yourself to have more if they're just not working for you. So I've posted a rubric. Maybe you've looked at it, maybe you haven't yet. I'll grade each annotation according to its adherence to MLA 8th edition standards, its appropriate academic tone, proper grammar, punctuation, all that kind of fun stuff. And then quality of the sources in relation to your working thesis. I'm gonna give you feedback today, as I mentioned earlier, on the sources you've already submitted. From what I saw just by looking through them real fast, the vast majority of your sources are good, reliable sources that you can absolutely stick with and keep working with. I didn't see anyone that put a source in that just made no sense or didn't really seem like it was worthwhile pursuing. But as I've shown you before, let me show you this template. Your annotated works cited is going to look something like this, where you'll provide the works cited entry here, however that may look. Then you'll give a brief discussion, a brief description or summary of the source and what their main argument is. And then at the end, just a sentence or 2 explaining how you think you might use your source in your paper. You need to keep that source. You may not use it later on, but it's important to at least have an idea of, oh, this is helpful for me, or oh, I found this source. It's interesting, but I don't think I'm going to use it. That's also totally fine. And I want to show you some really good examples because a lot of you did a really good job with this, actually. So, okay, scroll down. Yeah, so I like Audrey's here. So again, like she just kind of mentions right off the bat, this is her citation for the article that she's pulling from the Independent Review, which is a popular magazine. It's a more libertarian kind of minded magazine, but they're still a very reliable, they're still a very analytical, critical source to use. So they've got their own biases, as all magazines and newspapers do, but this is still one that tends to be at least very thoughtful in its opinion. So this is about the Uber all economy of the future. She gives a brief, just 4 sentence or so summary of the argument, includes some quotes if she feels that they're important. And at the very end, his explanations of the motives and concepts behind all these apps will be very helpful for my paper. However, the overall theme of these companies taking over our everyday lives might be more useful in the conclusion. Totally fair. So she's acknowledging, hey, like, I might use his motives and concepts, and maybe the way this could be better is explain what specifically those motives and concepts are. But then she also mentions, hey, like, the big idea he's pointing to, I also think I'm going to point to in my conclusion, because I agree with it. I think there's something there. Totally fair, totally works. Obviously, this can be cleaned up some, but for the most part, this looks pretty good. This is more or less the format that I'm looking for. Same with same here for Chris. Chris also did a really good job. And again, most of you did, where it's a brief summary of the article. In this article, the authors depict how two of the most prominent women in politics, Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin, yada, yada, yada. This source proves to be reliable as it pulls from quite a large collection of sources, as shown at the bottom of the article. And this article does a great job depicting not only how politicians are unfairly represented within political cartoons, but specifically how women are unfairly represented. That's really important because he's saying, like, hey, it's not just saying that, it's not just looking at politics specifically, it's looking at politics and gender, and that's a really important topic to look at. So again, it's not super long. It's maybe half a page, maybe 150, 200 words max, but it gets to the heart of what the argument of the paper is, and then it provides some commentary on it, explaining how it's helpful or how it's not helpful. And I want to say everyone who did annotations did that in some way. This is also going, I would say don't go on for more than a page for your annotations. Half page is better because then you can kind of fit more annotations in one page, but definitely don't go on for more than a page because then you'll wind up turning in a 10-page assignment. And to be quite frank, I don't have time to read all 10 pages. But if you have a source that's really important for you, that you're really going to be engaged with, a 1-page annotation is totally fine. I was really impressed with a lot of the sources that you all found. American Journal of Public Health. All of you seem to find sources that were from really great peer-reviewed journals or from really great magazines or newspapers. American Political Science Review. Lots of early state stuff. I think I showed this last time too, but I want to show it again. This is an example of Jackie. She picked an image from Sotheby's website, and then she provides a description of the image and then explains how it's beneficial for her. So she doesn't go into the huge like history or background of the image. She just kind of describes exactly what the image is itself and what the author might have, what the artist might have intended if she knows what that might be. Like she's done here, Banksy is commenting on the fact that his street art is now so successful that if people are paying millions of dollars when they originally were considered graffiti on the sides of buildings. This source is beneficial, blah, blah, blah. So if you're going to be quoting or citing actual images in your annotation bibliography, which you should, you want to do something along these lines as well, where you're explaining what the image is in brief and then explaining how it's important or not important to you. And as I said, as I go through this afternoon, I'll provide some comments off to the side, make sure you read them. But by and large, I don't have anything negative to say. I mostly have things to kind of point you in interesting directions. The biggest thing I want to make sure that everyone's doing is that no one's kind of straddling the fence. while there is some benefit to saying, well, this side's kind of right and this side's also kind of right, I want to make sure you're taking a clear stance. It's okay to acknowledge the benefits of the other side of an argument. That's why you have that counter argument paragraph. But if you straddle the fence too much, it looks like you're very wishy-washy. It looks like you're not committed. It looks like you're afraid to pick a side and argue the side. Don't be afraid. I'm not grading you on whether or not I agree with you. I'm grading you on whether or not you're presenting a good argument. So even if you present a paper that I'm reading, I'm like, wow, I really don't agree with this person, but the argument they're making is actually really strong and really good. Feel confident in that. Don't feel like you're doing this to please me, to agree with me. You're writing to present your own viewpoint, your own commentary on your research in a way that I or others might find convincing. Don't act like you're just writing for me. Act like you're writing for some kind of larger audience. I noticed this was just like a handful of people, and usually it comes when you're looking at anything with politics. People kind of get afraid to pick a side just because it is such a fraught environment. But don't be afraid to do that. If you want to take a side that says, you know what, both Obama and Trump had issues with their immigration policies, but I'm going to take a side and say such and such person's was much more detrimental, or such and such person's was more beneficial and better represented by political cartoons. Anything like that is totally okay. I just want to make sure that you're actually kind of staking some kind of ground and making some kind of argument. I don't want you to be afraid to do that. Questions about the annotated bibliography or research paper in general? Has anyone, because I know Ryan submitted some sources today for me to look at as well. Has anyone else found other sources since they turned in these 4 on Friday?
I found like 1 or 2.
I'm sorry, say that?
I found like 1 or 2 last night, but I didn't finish the annotations.
That's totally fine. Yeah. So at least like you took the effort to go back and see, okay, I found 1 or 2. I might use these, I may not use these, but at least I have these 2 to work with and annotate that I can look at later on if I need to. You don't need to read these sources deeply. Like I said, you need to know enough to provide a summary. You need enough to say whether or not it's going to be helpful for your research. But you can spend time later reading these articles more in depth. If you look at it and be like, I know this is going to be helpful. I want to use this one. I know it's going to be helpful in this way. I'll dive deeper into it when I've got more time next weekend. Totally fine. Again, the whole point of having the 9 sources is so you have more to work with instead of not enough. Is anyone having issues finding sources? Or anyone who's just kind of like searched high and low and just can't find anything helpful to them? It looks like you're all doing a really good job of finding things that are helpful to you, especially in regards to other non-peer-reviewed sources, like pulling from the New Yorker, Independent Review, stuff like that. That's all really great resources to pull from. Any general questions? Any concerns? How's everyone doing with online classes?
All right. It's kind of weird.
It is
but
weird.
I guess that's fine. I'd prefer to be
definitely-
sitting in Dallas Hall, though.
What's up?
I'd prefer to be sitting in Dallas Hall, personally.
Yeah, same. It's really weird. Like we joke all the time, like, oh, we've got vacation and we're not in school, but it's like, oh, I actually kind of like miss being on campus and seeing everyone. It's just like a different space, like gets away from everything. How are others? I should ask this way. Are other professors being accommodating in terms of online coursework?
Yeah, I mean, they're being pretty accommodating. I feel like it's moving at a faster pace, especially for the math classes, which I appreciate. But at the same time, I feel like I prefer a classroom setting because it really like makes me value what I'm doing, and it reminds me of what I'm there for. But it's hard finding the motivation when you're at home.
Yeah, I found that too. Like I've found it a lot more difficult to get reading and writing done here at home, because home is like where I come to decompress. Like I do all my reading and writing at my office, and then I come home to watch TV, hang out with my dogs, cook, do whatever. So when all those things are kind of combined, it's hard to be productive. And I'm sure a lot of you feel that way as well.
Yeah.
It's harder in classes where you're just like sitting, staring at where like your regular class is just like sitting, taking notes the whole time with like technical difficulties, like with Zoom and stuff.
Yeah.
Like for my business calc where she's like writing on the whiteboard, it gets so laggy and it will like get behind. It gets hard to deal with.
Yeah, I can't imagine, because in some ways, in a case like that, it would be better to record it ahead of time and then just put that recording up for you to watch, because then you don't have to deal with that lag. It's just a straight video. Now, you can't ask questions in like real time, but you wouldn't have that constant back and forth or constant kind of breaking up. Because I noticed that last night. I had a friend whose birthday was last night, and we had a birthday party over Zoom, and I couldn't understand anyone because it was constantly just kind of glitching out and being weird. So it's definitely very, very odd. Other question I want to ask, has anyone else given more thought as to whether or not they want to do a group presentation still, or they want to do an individual presentation? Your individual presentation will just be kind of a shorter version of your research paper in the form of a PowerPoint presented to the class very briefly, very casual. I'm obviously not grading you on posture or anything like that because I can't see you, but I want you all to have the opportunity to share what you're working on with one another, because I think what you're all doing is very interesting. And I want you all to have the opportunity to feel the payoff for that work and share what you've found with others. So does anyone think that they might still be doing a group presentation?
If you do a group presentation, like, what are we supposed to make, like a PowerPoint, or how do you want us to do that?
I think it would be easiest to do a PowerPoint, because then what can happen is one person can share their screen with the PowerPoint on it, but then all of you can still comment on the PowerPoint. So if, let's say, Nicole, you've got the first 2 slides talking about background information about whatever your topic is, then even though if someone else in your group has a PowerPoint, if they share the screen, you can still comment on the PowerPoint and everyone else can still hear you. The only thing you would have to do is just collaborate with your group partners about who's responsible for what parts of the presentation. And
But what if, like, we're doing, like, me and George, we're gonna do something. We're both doing alcohol, but he's doing like how women are
like
and stuff,
gender,
like doing different things. So how should we like organize that?
That's up to you all. You don't, if you want to kind of combine your findings and research and see how your research interests maybe intersect with one another, or how they complement one another, you can do that, absolutely.
Okay.
Or you can talk more generally about alcohol advertisements and some kind of social issue in general, if you don't want to get as specific as your individual projects. But you should be still kind of making some kind of argument and presenting some kind of like, hey, like George and I found all these interesting things, and here's what we kind of conclude from our research. So it could have more to do with George's topic, it could have more to do with your topic, it could be some combination of the two, or it could be kind of a more general, kind of broad overview.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
I want to kind of give you all free rein with this, because I feel like if you do the group project, I want to make sure you can do whatever you need to do to make it work. Because I understand that it's difficult when you can't physically meet with your group partners and everything, but I know there's still lots of ways that you can collaborate and figure things out together online. And you all seem to be pretty good at it so far. If you do want to do your individual project, that's totally fine as well. We're not going to do those presentations until after the final paper is due. It'll be like the last couple of class periods. I'm thinking if you're presenting by yourself, no more than like 5 to 7 minutes. And if you're presenting with someone else, about 10 minutes or so. So that way I can hear everyone speak for at least 5 minutes or so. And you'll be graded individually. So exactly if Nicole and George are presenting and George bombs, Nicole's grade will not be dependent on George's performance. I'm grading Nicole on hers and rating George's on George's, just to kind of make fair to everyone. Because I used to hate group projects in college. They're always so tough. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Again, I've got office hours starting at noon. If you want to meet with me, I'll still be back here in this meeting room. You can enter the same meeting ID. It should work for you. And we can talk about any issues you may have. If I don't let you enter the room right away, I'm probably with another student. Just kind of hang tight and I'll get with you as soon as I can. Sound good?
Yeah. Sounds
Great.
good.
All right. You all take care. I'm going to end the meeting. If you have any questions, again, office hours or shoot me an email. I'll be happy to help. Great work so far. I look forward to seeing what you all come up with next. Goodbye.
Thank you.